Today we're going to talk about the life of Matthew Perry. To the entire world, he was the one and only Chandler Bing. But what's so powerful about his story is that behind all that laughter, there was this private, lifelong battle with pain, with loneliness, and it was a struggle that started way, way before he ever became famous.
Okay, so on screen, right? He's Chandler Bing. He's that quick-witted, sarcastic friend that, let's be honest, we all kind of wished we had. But the thing is, that whole persona, it was a mask, a really carefully built one. The reality behind all the jokes was this story of just deep, relentless pain, a kind of emptiness that, no amount of fame or money or even love could ever seem to touch.
So to really get a handle on his life and ultimately his tragic death, we've got to go back. All the way back to the very beginning. Because it was right there, in his childhood, that the seeds of this lifelong struggle were first planted.
His life was just marked by trauma from the get-go. Can you believe this? As a baby, he had severe colic, and he was given this powerful sedative. A drug an infant should never, ever have. Then, just a few months later, his parents split up. By the time he was 5 years old, he was flying completely alone to visit his father. Imagine being that terrified little kid on a plane by yourself. It's really no wonder he said later in life that he always felt like an unaccompanied minor just trying to find his way in a world that felt totally unstable.
And that feeling of being alone really defined his childhood. You see, his mom was the press secretary for the Canadian Prime Minister, so she was incredibly busy. He was on his own a lot, just desperate for her attention, and he figured out pretty early on what worked: being funny. He became the little entertainer, the kid who could make his mom laugh after a long, stressful day. He was basically putting her needs before his own, even back then.
And then, when he was 14, he found what he thought was a solution. He and his friends tried alcohol for the very first time. Now, while they all got sick, something totally different happened to Matthew. He felt this wave of peace just wash right over him. For the first time ever, all that fear, that loneliness, that constant pain, it just went silent. And that, right there, was an incredibly dangerous, life-altering discovery.
Okay, so moving on. At 15, he packs up and moves to Los Angeles to live with his dad and is chasing that same dream of becoming an actor. All those coping mechanisms he learned as a kid, he basically channeled them right into his career. And, really, against all odds, he landed a role that wasn't just going to change his life, it was going to define an entire generation.
And, he felt like the role of Chandler Bing was, it was literally written for him. That sarcastic, witty, kind of emotionally guarded guy, that wasn't just acting. That was him. It was the defense mechanism he'd been building since he was a little boy. He was so perfect for the part that the producers of Friends actually held the role for him, even when he was stuck in a contract for another show. That's how much they wanted him.
So get this, he was just 25 years old when Friends first aired. 25! And almost overnight, he becomes one of the most famous actors on the entire planet. He'd done it. He achieved the dream, right? The fame, the money, the recognition, all of it. But the problem was, even that level of success couldn't shut down the inner turmoil he'd been fighting his whole life.
At the absolute height of his fame, he's dating Julia Roberts. Julia Roberts, one of the biggest stars in the world. But that little voice inside his head, the one that's always telling him he's broken, that he's unlovable, it was just too loud. He became completely convinced that sooner or later she'd figure out he wasn't enough for her and she'd leave him. So what did he do? In this classic pattern of self-sabotage that would happen again and again, he left her first, breaking both of their hearts in the process.
And really, this is the central conflict of his entire life. On the one hand, his fame is just soaring into the stratosphere. But on the other, his private life is spiraling down into this desperate, desperate battle for survival. He even said it himself. You can literally track the progression of his addiction just by watching Friends and looking at how his weight changes season by season.
Now, he'd been struggling with alcohol for years, but a jet ski accident, that was the big, dangerous turning point. A doctor prescribed him Vicodin for the injuries, and that pill gave him the exact same feeling of peace as alcohol, except it was 100 times stronger. He was hooked, instantly. And that's when a new, and frankly, far more terrifying dependency took hold.
So at the absolute peak of his addiction, he was taking 55 Vicodin pills, not a week, every single day. He was doing anything to get them, faking injuries, lying to doctors. He even admitted to going to open houses and searching through medicine cabinets just to get his fix. It was a total obsession. and his weight just plummeted down to 58 kilos. That's around 128 pounds.
Look, this wasn't just some phase he was going through. This was a full-time, all-out war against himself that went on for decades. It got so bad that his colon literally burst from the opioid abuse. Doctors told his family he had a 2% chance of surviving the night. A 2% chance! And somehow he pulled through, but only after spending 2 weeks in a coma and 5 months in the hospital. The scale of this fight is just staggering. And through all this, his friends, co-stars, they weren't just colleagues, you know? They really were his family. But his addiction was this giant open secret on set. And one day, Jennifer Aniston came to his dressing room, and he said her eyes were just full of tears. And she confronted him. She said, "We know you're drinking." And he said that word, "we." It hit him like a sledgehammer. Of course, he denied it. He was just crippled with shame. But that moment was so important. It showed him his secret wasn't a secret anymore, and the people who loved him most were absolutely terrified for him.
The thing is, he knew. Deep down, he got it. He knew just how close to the edge he was living. He wrote this chilling line in his memoir, and it's just this haunting bit of self-awareness. It really reveals just how precarious his life felt to him every single day.
But in his final years, despite this massive ongoing struggle, he found a new purpose. He became focused on one thing, taking all those decades of pain and turning it into something that could actually help other people avoid going down the same path. And he did that by pouring his entire life story into this brutally, brutally honest book. He was really clear about this. He didn't write it for more fame or for more money. He wrote it to try and give some hope to anybody else out there battling what he called the big, terrible thing. He wanted to show people they weren't alone, that even someone who seemed to have it all could suffer just like them. And, most importantly, that there was a way out. So then, his death on October 28, 2023, was ultimately ruled to be from the acute effects of ketamine. Now, ketamine is this really powerful anesthetic, but it's also used legally in very controlled therapy sessions for things like depression, which Matthew was getting. The problem was, the level in his system when he died was so high that it indicated he was also getting it illegally. And that's why a police investigation was opened up to try and figure out who was supplying him, with suspicion that there were people out there who were exploiting his addiction. But in the end, his ultimate wish, it was realized. He said this over and over again. He didn't want his legacy to be friends. He wanted to be remembered for helping people. And after he passed away, his family established the Matthew Perry Foundation to do exactly that. It really transformed his legacy from just being about comedy to being about hope. It ensures his story won't just make people laugh anymore, but that it might actually save lives.
So Matthew Perry's story really leaves us with this powerful, kind of unsettling question. I mean, he had everything the world tells us is supposed to make us happy, right? The fame, the money, the adoration of millions, but none of it was ever enough to quiet that pain that started when he was just a little kid. His life is this tragic, powerful reminder that the deepest wounds, they're not healed by what's on the outside. They're healed by something much, much harder to find: real internal peace.